Welcome. Welcome to Chapter 3 of our video series on the history of work. In this chapter, we shall explore how the Roman Empire's labor systems and societal structures evolved, eventually diverging into the feudal West and the resilient Byzantine East. Let's go.
For centuries, the Roman Empire stood as the foremost power in the Mediterranean world. By the 2nd century CE, its boundaries stretched from the shores of Britain and the Rhine frontier in the northwest to the deserts of North Africa in the south, and from the Atlantic coast of the Iberian Peninsula in the west to the fertile lands of the Near East in the east. Within these borders lived tens of millions of people. One city, Rome, sat at the center of it all, a metropolis that housed roughly 1 million residents. This was an astonishing figure for any pre-industrial age, and a testament to Rome's ability to organize, supply, and govern a vast domain. In Rome itself, one could witness an extraordinary urban environment. Monumental buildings and engineering marvels defined the city's skyline. The Colosseum, completed in 80 CE, could hold around 50,000 spectators. Citizens, rich and poor alike, flocked there to watch gladiatorial contests, animal hunts, and the grim spectacle of executions. These bread and circuses events were not mere entertainments. They served as tools of political stability, allowing emperors and elite patrons to keep the urban masses engaged and relatively content. Beneath these spectacles lay the sophisticated infrastructure that made such a city possible. 11 major aqueducts brought clean, fresh water from distant sources into the heart of Rome. They fed not only the public fountains and baths, but also the homes of the wealthy. The famous public baths, such as the Baths of Caracalla, were enormous complexes that could accommodate thousands of bathers daily. Rome's marketplaces teemed with goods from across the empire. Grain from Egypt, shipped in large volumes, fed the metropolitan populace, distributed through the state's grain dole known as the Care of Annona. Wine from Gaul and olive oil from Hispania arrived in amphorae, while spices from India, silks from China, and ivory from Africa testified to the empire's extensive trade routes. This economic engine was powered by agriculture, the true backbone of the Roman world. Vast estates, latifundia, dotted the countryside in Italy, North Africa, and Egypt. These large-scale farms specialized in producing the grain, olive oil, and wine essential to feeding the cities and armies. Yet this immense agricultural output depended heavily on a workforce held in bondage. The empire's economy rested substantially on chattel slavery. Enslaved men, women, and children worked under harsh conditions. They labored in fields and mines, served in households, and even practiced skilled crafts under the strict control of their owners. Roman authors like Cato the Elder, in his treatise De Agricultura, advised landowners to treat enslaved people merely as tools, maintaining them with just enough food and rest to ensure their productivity. Such an arrangement depressed wages and limited opportunities for free peasants and artisans. It created a system that concentrated wealth in the hands of a small elite class. Archaeological evidence from villas and their slave quarters confirms that the enslaved endured cramped, difficult living conditions, and that their labor was ruthlessly exploited to sustain the comfort and splendor enjoyed by Rome's ruling classes. For a long time, this system seemed almost unassailable. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were forming. As we move toward the 3rd century CE, signs of strain and imbalance begin to appear, revealing deeper vulnerabilities that would reshape the Roman world and eventually divide it into two very different eras. The Roman Empire was never a monolith. The regions in the west, such as Britain, Gaul, and parts of the Iberian Peninsula, had long traditions of agriculture. They became strongly influenced by Latin language, Roman law, and military culture. The economy here remained heavily dependent on local estates producing basic goods, while cities, though present, were fewer and generally less cosmopolitan than in the east. In the West, the enduring reliance on enslaved labor and a more rural Roman culture persisted. Political and social life intertwined with older Roman traditions and Latin institutions. In contrast, the eastern provinces, encompassing Greece, modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Egypt, had experienced centuries of urban development before Rome's arrival. These areas were deeply rooted in Hellenistic culture, a legacy of Alexander the Great's conquests. The eastern regions were networks of well-established cities, connected by roads, rivers, and maritime routes. Greek was the lingua franca, facilitating commerce, diplomacy, and scholarship. Cities like Alexandria, Antioch, and Ephesus were known for their bustling trade, sophisticated intellectual life, and vibrant markets. Here, commerce thrived. Long-distance trade brought spices, silks, and precious materials from as far as India and China. The Eastern Mediterranean thus had a strong mercantile tradition that stood in marked contrast to the large estates and slower land-based economy characteristic of the West. These underlying differences would become more pronounced as the empire faced mounting internal and external pressures. The 3rd century CE brought a series of crises to the Roman world: frequent changes of emperor through military coups, threats from migrating peoples along the frontiers, and severe economic turbulence. The empire's currency, once stable silver denarii, was repeatedly debased to pay armies and bureaucracies, fueling runaway inflation. Merchants lost confidence in Roman coinage, and some regions reverted to barter. Political instability disrupted trade networks and communication lines. Maintaining a huge standing army along vast frontiers drained the treasury, while internal factions and rival claimants to the throne undermined central authority. All these tensions affected East and West differently. The East's dense networks of trade and prosperous cities could better absorb shocks. The West, more reliant on local agriculture and less integrated into extensive trade routes, suffered more acutely. As the empire's center of gravity slowly shifted eastward, reforms by emperors like Diocletian and Constantine, intended as remedies, would highlight these growing differences. By the late 3rd century CE, Emperor Diocletian recognized the problem of governing so large and diverse an empire from a single center. He attempted a radical solution: the Tetrarchy. Under this system, 4 rulers, 2 senior emperors called Augusti and 2 junior emperors called Caesars, would share power and administer different segments of the empire. Though this arrangement was short-lived, it firmly established the concept that the empire might be too large to manage as one entity. Each half, East and West, became more self-contained. Different capitals emerged: Nicomedia and later Constantinople in the east, Milan and then Ravenna in the west, in addition to the old city of Rome, which increasingly lost its central governing role. Under Constantine the Great, these divisions took a more cultural turn. In 330 CE, Constantine founded a new capital at Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. Strategically positioned on the Bosporus Strait, it linked the Black Sea to the Mediterranean and lay at the crossroads of major trade routes. Over time, Constantinople would grow into a metropolis, rivaling Rome, yet distinct in language, culture, and orientation. The building of such a powerful eastern capital shone a spotlight on the East's advantages. It had access to the wealthy provinces of Asia Minor, the grain fields of Egypt, and the vibrant commercial networks that brought in taxes and goods more reliably than the increasingly troubled western provinces. Constantine also legalized and then favored Christianity, a move that would shape the ideological and cultural frameworks of both halves. By the end of the 4th century, under Theodosius I, Christianity became the empire's state religion. Latin remained the official language of administration for centuries, but Greek was gaining ground, especially in the East. Over time, the East would embrace Greek more fully for its official business, and the Church would develop stronger ties to the Greek-speaking tradition of theology and philosophy. These reforms, originally aimed at saving the empire, had unintended consequences. By improving governance and highlighting the East's stability and wealth, they made the East appear as the more viable core of the Roman world. The West, beset by repeated invasions and weaker commercial infrastructure, would struggle. The administrative and cultural divergence between the two halves, initially a practical solution, set the stage for a permanent split. In the West, a chain of events led to the unraveling of central authority. Throughout the 4th and 5th centuries, migrating peoples, whom the Romans called barbarians, crossed the Rhine and Danube frontiers. Goths, Vandals, and others pushed into Roman territories, sometimes as settlers under treaty, other times as invaders. Meanwhile, the complex economy of the West, already weakened by reduced trade and inflation, contracted further. Urban life diminished as cities struggled to maintain infrastructure without stable imperial subsidies. The Western Empire's armies were expensive to maintain, and without robust tax revenues, paying and provisioning them became increasingly difficult. In 476 CE, the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic warlord Odoacer. This did not instantly erase Roman institutions, but it marked a symbolic end to the imperial authority. In the aftermath, the Western lands fragmented into a series of successor kingdoms ruled by various Germanic elites, Visigoths in Iberia, Ostrogoths in Italy, Franks in Gaul, and so forth. These polities adapted Roman law and infrastructure where they could, but with no central Roman state to enforce uniform standards. Power devolved to the local level. In this new world, people sought protection rather than mobility. Local strongmen and warlords offered security in exchange for labor and produce. This arrangement proved stable enough to endure and gradually solidified into a system we recognize as feudalism. While the Western Roman Empire fragmented into feudal domains, the Byzantine Empire maintained a centralized state with a strong currency, the gold solidus, and urban life centered on Constantinople. Despite challenges like the Justinian plague and external invasions, Byzantium preserved Roman administrative systems, legal codes such as the Corpus Juris Civilis, and a close relationship between the state and economy.
And that's the video. In the next one, we'll explore the Middle Ages. We'll look at the rise of feudalism after the fall of Western Rome. We'll also discuss the enduring legacy of the Byzantine Empire. See you there.